Welcome to Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today we talk to Philanthropy Roundtable President and CEO Christie Herrera about the threats facing the American charitable sector and what we might do about them. Let's go. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers introduces listeners to the fascinating people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. We speak with philanthropists, reformers, social entrepreneurs, nonprofit executives, religious leaders, scholars, journalists, and anyone else who will help us understand contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. My name is Jeremy Beer. Thank you for joining us. All right, thank you for joining us, joining me for another episode of Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today is April 16, 2024, and I am very, very happy to be speaking today with Christie Herrera, President and CEO of Philanthropy Roundtable. Many of you will be familiar with the Roundtable and its work, but if you aren't, the Roundtable, in its own words, works to foster excellence in philanthropy, protect philanthropic freedom, and help donors advance liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. So we're going to talk to Christie today about some threats to philanthropic freedom that the Roundtable has identified and is working on, tips for achieving excellence in philanthropy. So this is not all about policy. We'll also talk about how you can perhaps give a little bit more effectively and strategically yourself. We'll touch on this ongoing conversation about donor advised funds. If you don't know what that conversation is all about, we will update you there. And then maybe more broadly, if we have time, kind of where American philanthropy is going. With that, Christie Herrera, welcome.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
I understand we have you today just before you're going to go do the meat of your job and headed to the Hill to talk sense into somebody. Is that right?
Yeah. And, we were talking earlier that this is going to be a much more pleasant conversation than that one. Probably.
I think so. That's my intention. I'm sure it will be. That's great. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. Many of our listeners, I said in the open, probably know what Philanthropy Roundtable is, but a lot won't. So just tell people why Philanthropy Roundtable exists, how it came into being.
Yeah, you did a great job in the opener. We're the only home for donors who share our values. We want to help them advance liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. We want to help them be as effective as possible in their charitable giving. And we want to stand up to people who want to restrict their giving through our philanthropic freedom work. And really, there are a lot of wonderful groups within the conservative movement, in the philanthropic sector in general, that do all of those things. But there's really only one place where you can find all three of those services in one spot, and that's at the Roundtable.
And you're not just, you don't just contend for those principles with respect to federal policy and so forth, but what other kinds of things do? You help people get better at their giving, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We like to say, the job one for us is philanthropic freedom. You can't make any progress on the issues you care about if you're not able to give how and when and where you choose. So we have a robust philanthropic freedom initiative at the Roundtable, the federal and state level, pushing back and killing bad legislation that would harm giving, getting into law good laws and regulations that would encourage giving, and really just being a cheerleader for the philanthropic sector. My background is in lobbying and advocacy, and when I came into the philanthropic world 5 years ago, I thought, gosh, philanthropy needs to do a much better job with defending itself. And so that is what we're doing at the Roundtable. Philanthropic freedom is really job one. And then, when it comes to helping donors be more effective with their giving, we have a robust team of former grant makers who will come alongside you and help you determine your giving goals and your priorities, help to connect you with groups on the ground who put your values at the heart of what they do. And also just to help you get the landscape of giving broadly. There is so much pressure on donors and what they should do with their money. So we come alongside donors who share our values and help them get those values out into the world.
So let's start today then with the last part of what you were talking about there. Philanthropy is often not in the real news, like the news that everyday people hear, right? It's the news that you hear and that I hear. Often it doesn't really seep down or out into the sort of everyday world, but it has recently. It's since October 7th, the Hamas attack on Israel and everything, the protests that have followed on college campuses and the hearings of college presidents and on the Hill and everything that's up with that.
There's going to be another one soon. I mean, I just got an alert that Colombia's president is going to go before the same panel. I mean, so yeah, there's lots going on.
Talk about that then. How should this whole thing, in your mind, influence people's giving to higher ed?
Oh, higher ed. I mean, could we have predicted in the last 6 months to a year where higher ed has gone? I don't think anyone would have predicted the ouster of several Ivy League university presidents, the just absolute exit of donors who were putting their names on buildings. I mean, higher ed is having a moment right now, and this is a really good example of where we can and should be engaging on these issues. That's why the Roundtable just launched our higher education donor services to really help donors do just that. You know, we want to help our donors protect their donor intent. We want to see our donors advance their values, and we just want to help them give more effectively to higher ed and get real results. And the work is really taking off. You know, I talk to so many donors who say, listen, my name is on a building, or I'm funding scholarships, but I'm kind of unsure of what to do about higher ed. And there are really 3 pieces of advice that I give to people on a regular basis. And one is, feel free to completely ditch your alma mater. You know, the days of giving out of nostalgia are over. We have to demand better. And that means funding institutions and leaders who are committed to our ideals. Competition is a good thing. You know, if Harvard loses $1 billion in donations from graduates, it's one thing. But if those graduates give loudly to another institution, Harvard's going to feel the heat. Second piece of advice I give is funding individuals and ideas and not just institutions. You know, a really smart Ivy League professor recently told me that unrestricted gifts are the work of the devil. You know, no one wants to see dollars.
Within higher ed in particular, if we might clarify that a little bit. It's not so bad to your local soup kitchen at all. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in higher ed, I mean, no one wants to see their dollars fund something that you don't agree with, like DEI. So instead of funding institutions, we should be supporting specific scholars or academics that directly align with your values. And the third piece of advice is to agitate for reform from the outside. I mean, we've seen a lot of donors pull their gifts from higher ed, and that is awesome. But the result of that is not really long-term. But if you pull your money from higher ed and give it to an advocacy group that starts to agitate and advocate from the outside, you start to create pressure for the schools to change. And so there is a lot of runway for conservatives who want to stay in the higher ed space. We just need to be smarter about our giving.
Not giving to your alma mater. That's one of the things that's sort of been easier said than done. So I think for a lot of people, are you finding now in your conversations with donors that maybe are we reaching any kind of tipping point here? Is it different this time?
I think so. And I think the reason it's different is because of the proliferation of so many great university leaders who are really taking up the cause. I'm thinking about Ben Sass at the University of Florida. I mean, I'm a Florida State grad, and for me to be advocating that donors give to the University of Florida, you know what a big deal that is. But Ben Sass is doing a great job. You know, I think about the University of North Carolina university system. They've begun ditching DEI, and that's something that I think more institutions should follow. You obviously have stalwarts like University of Chicago, Pano, and University of Austin shows that it's possible to create new alternatives altogether. And so now there's a place for people to go. And I think maybe 10 plus years ago, you couldn't have said that.
Also, a lot of smaller faith-based liberal arts institutions that
Sure, the
don't
Hillsdale.
have, the Hillsdales, University of Dallas, et cetera, don't really have the alumni base. And so it's hard for them. They could use people who are alienated from their own alma maters to come in and be their honorary alumni and join in to be part of those families. The other thing you said that I want to call out is, I don't know, first of all, how many people kind of know other than below a very sophisticated level of giving that you can fund specific individuals and ideas.
Sure.
But there's also like a way to, am I correct in thinking that there's a way to do that that's better than other ways in terms of, you can tell me, this is going to go to the department of such and such and help so-and-so's research versus say an independent 501c3 that's kind of stands alongside a university that really shares your values and funds a professor that way. Could you speak to that sort of distinction?
Yeah. I mean, I think that donor intent is paramount to all of these conversations. And your approach might be to give general operating support, and that's fine and that's great. But for higher education institutions, if you want to lock in your values, you need to make sure these things are in writing. And that's something that our team at the Roundtable with our higher education donor services helps you do to help walk you through your gift agreement, to make sure that there are safeguards in place so that donor intent is not violated. I think about the story of the Moritz family in Columbus, Ohio. They funded a number of, I believe it was law school scholarships at the Ohio State University. You have to put the V in there.
Let's just say Ohio State. We don't need to get them their "the" on this podcast.
And it's when the family had given an endowment gift, and they received information to see how the gift had been going. A fraction of the promised scholarships had actually been awarded. You found that, I believe it was the university's development department had been, siphoning money from this endowment to help fund their operations. And, the family went back and said, this is really not what we had intended. And the school said, I'm sorry, but this is how it is. You want to avoid that situation in the future. It is becoming increasingly easier and more common to do it. So, we do encourage our donor community to make sure you do as much due diligence on the front end of this giving as possible.
There's so many very practical, particular tactics to deploy. I think people need to be really, really, really careful. I've seen enough of these cases myself and work with donors. For instance, one of your pieces of advice, and the Philanthropy Roundtable puts out something called Top 10 Tips for Higher Education Funders. You can find it on the website.
Joanne Florino, she's brilliant.
Very good. Full of very good practical advice. It's not that long. But one of them is, and this is so in the weeds, but it's important. If you really want to make sure that your dollars are used how you want them to be used, you have to give year to year. You can't give $10 million bucks, and say, here's what it's for. If there's no other carrot out there for the university to be stretching for, you're very unlikely to see those dollars used as you would like them to be used. You agree with that?
That's right. I mean, I was recently talking to a think tank president, and, he was saying, we're talking about some of the other places in town that have large, operating margins. And this person told me, I don't think I want anything like that. I want to be accountable to my donors. And they're the ones that are going to tell me through their gifts whether or not I'm doing a good job. So, I absolutely can see that applying to higher ed as well.
I think it's just really smart. That's from your own advice. The other thing you talk about in that document, which I think is worth calling out here, is, I love that you do this, is really consider whether the traditional higher ed model has enough support, and whether, trade schools, technical institutes, community colleges, that kind of thing may not be more aligned with your own values and vision than a traditional college or university. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like college is not the path for everyone. My sisters and myself, we were the first in our family to go to college and graduate from college. And trade schools, vocation, on-the-job workforce development is a path that has been not ignored, but not as supported as traditional higher ed. And I think that's been a mistake. So it has been really wonderful to see givers. I think of the Marcus Foundation in Georgia doing great workforce development, work on the ground with charities like Construction Ready that help people get into the construction industry. We need to see more of that kind of activity take place within our donor community.
Yeah, and you'll also find that there are fewer, I think in general, fewer pro-Hamas protests on your average community college than there is.
You would like to think so, but it is, and you guys have probably seen this as well, especially in the last 4 years, you have seen just the ultimate corruption of what had otherwise been wonderful direct services charities be corrupted by, social justice, DEI. And so, I think donors have to be on watch way more than they have been in the past, because the organization that you might have such nostalgia for that does great work on the ground might have recently said, our mission is now to promote equity and social justice and not to do this great work that we've been doing. So, keep
It's entirely true.
Yeah.
I'm glad you pointed that out. It's not just a higher ed thing. And this is happening, as you said, in direct services charities. And sometimes just do your research. Sometimes it's something that's being said to kind of play the game, but it's not really affecting how things are happening on the ground. And maybe you're fine with that. And other times it really is kind of restructuring an entire organization. That might be a different story. Let's go to a break. We got to take a break here. We're going to come right back with Christie Herrera from the Philanthropy Roundtable. Talk about philanthropic freedom and donor advised funds. Be right back.
Hey folks, I'm Jack Fowler, the author of Civil Thoughts. That's the free weekly email newsletter for the Center for Civil Society at AmPhil, where we try to strengthen civil society. Civil Thoughts gives you a dozen plus recommended readings. Here's a link. Here's an excerpt of important articles and essays that I've come across in the previous week. I think anyone who's intelligent, dear intelligent American, that you will like it. So how do you get Civil Thoughts? Well, you go to civilthoughts.com, sign up. Trust me, it's totally free, risk-free. We're not selling your name to anybody. You'll enjoy it. civilthoughts.com.
All right, we are back. Thank you for joining us. Speaking with Christie Herrera, the president and CEO of Philanthropy Roundtable. We've just been talking about how donors might approach higher ed and the rest of their giving now in a way that's going to safeguard their donor intent a little bit more. Let's turn to philanthropic freedom. You mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast. What the heck are we talking about? I think most everyday people, Christie, again, not you and me, don't go around thinking about philanthropic freedom. Like, what does that mean?
Sure. I mean, it's the right of donors to give how and when and where they choose. And donors need this flexibility to be able to do the good work that they want to do with their charitable giving. The problem is that we are seeing an increasing number of attacks, both from the left and the right, to be honest with you, to put more restrictions on what people call, big philanthropy, capital B, capital P, big pharma and big tobacco. There is now this concept of big philanthropy and how we need to tame it. And I think it's a mistake. I mean, it's pretty basic economics that if you regulate something, you're going to get less of it. And when you put more restrictions on philanthropy in the charitable sector, you're going to get less of it. So that's why we put such a focus on philanthropic freedom at the Roundtable. We have a team of lobbyists at the federal level in states all across the country to stand up for donors' rights. And that is job one, because if we don't do that, we can't make progress on any of the other issues that we care about.
It seems to me that in the last, 10 years, 15 years, the biggest disincentive to charitable giving that has come along, the worst idea, the thing that would restrict giving the most is these various sorts of attacks on donor privacy, the basically requiring charities, in some cases public charities, 501c3 organizations, to release the lists of their donors. Can you talk about what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think so, because it not only relates to your direct giving, but when you're looking at the charitable sector more broadly, I do believe it's contributing to the overall number of donors declining. I mean,
Yeah. And that is a trend we're seeing, right? I mean, that's one of the negative trends in American philanthropy.
That's exactly right. I mean, Giving USA tells us that charitable giving has decreased for the first time in a 15-year span. And that's because of inflation and economic uncertainty. We know that middle-class giving has been on the decline for a while now, even if larger donors are making up the gap with bigger gifts. So in that context, I worry about how broad donor disclosure efforts could make it worse.
What's behind those efforts, Christie? Like, what are people trying to accomplish when they...
Oh, gosh. Well, it is really, a three-step process in my mind. One is to force donor disclosure, which is the names and addresses and lists and amounts and organizations receiving funds. The second step is for those who disagree with that giving to harass and shame you. And the third is to build up so much disdain for this giving that you attempt to use political power to force giving to go to other causes. And so, we have seen this time and time again, especially with the greenlighting initiatives of about 15, 20 years ago, where there was this big push by many on the progressive left to force foundations to, reveal the race and gender and sexual orientation of their staff and their board and their grantees, their vendors even. And, the forcing of that information is just the first step. And then what is going to happen when folks use that information to help change their giving? And so donor disclosure is a similar problem. And again, we're seeing it on the right and the left. There are many on the right who want to tear down what they call big philanthropy, and they feel like philanthropy is so corrupted by the left that it's unforgivable and we have to put these restrictions in place. I think it's wrong and misguided. And then there are those on the left that, want to expose the quote dark money networks on the right, and they conflate political giving and charitable giving, and we end up with donor disclosure for 501c3 organizations. Donor disclosure does not hurt the big guys. They have a team of accountants and lawyers who are going to handle those problems. It hurts the everyday givers who are just going to stop giving as a result.
Is there any state right now that is forcing donor disclosure from 501c3s? Is California doing that?
They would like to if they had the opportunity. I'm sure it's
right. I know they'd like
the
to.
font of all bad ideas is in the California state legislature. Arizona recently passed a ballot initiative that would have this reductive quote, the money follows the money situation, and where you would have to disclose your donors and their donors' donors and their donors' donors, to where, really the U.S. Treasury is the real donor of all things in America, because you have to declare so many donors and their donors, you kind of lose track. The bright spot is, though, that there are a number of states who are proactively putting into place donor privacy protections, and the Roundtable has been a leader in that, along with People United for Privacy, which is a wonderful nonprofit that focuses on this issue. 17 states have put these protections into place that basically say government officials cannot demand donor lists from nonprofits. And if for some reason they do get the donor list and they leak it, whether intentionally or unintentionally,
that would be against the law. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, they can't do that either, right? Even if they get the list, they can't.
Yeah, if that's right. If they get the list, they are, and it gets leaked. However it gets leaked, then it's a crime to do it. We want to stop the wholesale naming and shaming of donors because of the issues they care about. It matters on the right for obvious reasons. And it also matters on the left. And, in those 17 states where we have worked with People United for Privacy to pass this legislation, we have seen the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and LGBTQ groups come out in support of this legislation. I think we all agree that donor privacy is a fundamental right.
Yeah, well, that's where the original, wasn't there a Supreme Court ruling having to do with the NAACP donor lists back in the day?
Yeah, that's right. NAACP v. Alabama in the 1950s, where the state of Alabama said, we want to crush the NAACP, and we're going to do it by demanding and publishing their donor lists. You can
see the historic roots of this sort of desire.
Yeah,
it's pretty much always about social pressure, shaming, cancellation in the current terminology of people who support disfavored causes in the current social context.
That's right. If you look at any major social movement in this country, from women's suffrage to civil rights, if you look at gay rights in the 60s and beyond, all of those movements have been funded with anonymous giving. And so you worry about, when you force donor disclosure, what is the next major social movement that you will repress as a result?
Where I was going earlier was, right now, if you're particularly concerned about donor privacy, and for many other reasons, which we can go into, what you can do is you can start a donor advised fund. You can start that in many number of places, like a Fidelity or a Schwab, et cetera, or a perhaps better choice, a Donors Trust, Bradley Impact Fund, so on, National Christian Foundation, so on and so forth. Knights of Columbus Charitable Fund. You give money to the fund. That's your charitable donation. Then you advise the fund to give out from there, and your name is never associated with the gift unless you want it to be. Talk about where things stand from your perspective with the conversation about DAFs.
Yeah, we talked about the decline in charitable giving. DAFs are a real bright spot. We've seen DAF grant making increase every year since 2009. DAF giving has more than doubled in the past 5 years. And that's why we're seeing so much scrutiny. But, when I look at the opponents of DAFs, largely they are the same opponents of wealth and capitalism and philanthropy. And, people that just don't like the philanthropic sector. DAFs are the most recent shiny object for them to take on. I do think that DAFs are a really worthy tool for individuals who may not have the time to devote to their grant making and set up a large foundation. I think that we're seeing fewer and fewer mega foundations, big institutional foundations on the right and left get started. And there's a reason for that. DAFs are a great way for donors to still engage with charitable giving. It's a way for them to fund controversial causes, which is we talked about October 7th. There is probably no better use of a DAF than to do critical and life-saving work in the Middle East, as well as supporting our Jewish communities here at home. DAFs can be used to involve the next gen in their giving. DAFs can be used to fund local needs where you don't necessarily have local knowledge of the problem, but you want to help. DAFs and the sponsoring organizations can help you do that. So, we have been probably one of the most vociferous supporters of DAFs and all of the good work that they do. And I think it's a big reason why Congress, considered a major legislative package to restrict DAFs and restrict how foundations and others use DAFs. And it never went anywhere. It's because as soon as you ask the question, are DAFs worthy of more regulation, you get the immediate answer that they are what is good about the charitable sector. And we need to be doing more to encourage DAFs and foundations and LLCs and C corps and all of the vehicles that donors have in their toolkit. We need to be doing more to encourage all of those things. And more regulation means that we'll get less of it.
Do you ever think of flipping it around the other way? Given where you guys are coming from, one of the things people complain about is with DAF, there's no required payout percentage. like there is with foundations. And your guys' response has been, yeah, but they pay out well above the 5%. It's like 13% a year or something like that. And also sponsoring organizations can put their own rules into place. I think that's also true, right? Yeah. So it's just that there's no federal or legal policy on that, but sponsoring organizations like the National Christian Foundation or whomever can put their own rules into place. It's higher than with foundations, right? I believe. Isn't the average payout of DAFs higher than it is with?
Yeah, it's much higher, and the percentage varies based on what numbers you're looking at in what year.
Why is that? That's interesting. Like, why, if you took away the 5% payout requirement with foundations, would the percentage actually go up with foundations?
I don't know. It's a really interesting question, and it's one that we don't get into at the roundtable about, foundation payout and such. We would like to see whatever vehicles donors choose for donors to be as free as possible to express their values within those vehicles. The rise of DAFs is a good thing. They fund so many things from, hospitals and universities, pro-life groups fighting for free speech, and all of those groups that are doing work that others deem controversial. We need to support more of that work and not less of it.
Okay. Last question for you, Christie, because you got to go to the Hill and talk sense into whoever it is you're talking sense into today. Are there we've maybe talked about a couple of these already, but maybe you have one or two that will come to your mind. Are there any particular pivots you would like to see foundations make, or maybe philanthropists make more generally, in light of your mission, in the light of your mission to advance liberty, opportunity, personal responsibility? Are there areas of giving you're like, man, I wish there were a lot more money flowing into this right now rather than this, even among people that you agree with?
I mean, I think the bottom line for conservative philanthropy is we need to stop funding organizations that are undermining our values. And we need to align our giving so that all areas of giving advance the ideas and values that we care about. I think about policy philanthropy. That's still important. The Cato's, Heritage, Manhattan Institute, AEI, State Policy Network, we can go on and on. These groups are doing awesome work in advancing our values, and they're still very worthy recipients of support from donors. What has changed, we talked about this earlier, is in the last 4 years, so many direct services charities have drifted. And I really think it's a shame because the pluralism of charitable missions and approaches and groups within the philanthropic sector has been homogenized in the name of social justice and DEI. It's no longer enough to be a food bank that does great work on hunger issues. Now there is pressure for you to be the food bank whose mission is to first advance DEI and equity. It's crazy. And so, what we do every day is help our donors link up with awesome organizations on the ground that put our values at the heart of what they do. And so when you are giving, your giving is bifurcated into policy, philanthropy, and direct services, you want to make sure that your giving isn't working cross purposes with each other. I think, one other thing that I would love to mention is just the number of issues on the right where our community has disengaged and ceded ground to the left, thinking about mental health, healthcare in general, homelessness, conservation. We need to get back the arts. We need to get back into the game. There are groups on the ground who are doing incredible work in all of these areas. It is really, really, really important for donors to come to the table and help to solve these big problems and not just let one side of the political spectrum come up with all the answers.
Christie, how can people get involved with Philanthropy Roundtable?
Well, if you're listening and you would love to get help on donor intent or governance or compliance or nuts and bolts issues, if you need assistance with your overall giving strategy, or if you just want another brain to help you think through a new giving area, we are here for you. We want to be your partner so that you can make the biggest impact possible. So you can reach us at philanthropyroundtable.org. We are here to help.
Fantastic. Christie, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. And good luck with your work, not just today on the Hill, but going forward.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Appreciated being here.
Take care. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, we invite you to subscribe and/or rate and review this discussion on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to our podcasts. And have a guest you'd like to hear from? Send your requests to our producer, Katie Janis, at kjanis@amphil.com. That's KJANUS@amphil.com.